Welcome to our sharing on the second half of St. John's Gospel. And we come towards the end of chapter 15 now, where Jesus speaks about the fact that the beloved disciples are going into a hostile world. So we have to look at this reality, not very comfortable, but Jesus wanted to keep them grounded in the truth. And so chapter 15 from verse 18, Jesus said, "If the world hates you, remember that it hated me before you. If you belonged to the world would love you as its own. But because you do not belong to the world, because my choice withdrew you from the world, therefore the world hates you." So the logic is very clear. "Remember the words I said to you," Jesus said. "A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. But it will be on my account that they do all this, because they do not know the one who sent me. If I had not come, if I had not spoken to them, they would have been blameless. But as it is, they have no excuse for their sin. Anyone who hates me hates my Father." So now we're coming down to the very uncomfortable, cruel situation that Jesus is actually in. And he has to warn his disciples that they are going to receive the same treatment as himself. So we have looked at the fact that they become his inheritors. And if they do become his inheritors, they also inherit the cross. They inherited everything from him. And they will also inherit persecution from the unbelieving world, the cosmos. So let's look at this for a few minutes. We've been in a wonderful atmosphere of peace and love and intimacy with God and with each other. And in this wonderful atmosphere of the final discourse of Jesus, we've almost forgotten that Judas left the room, that Judas went out and that night had fallen. We've not been thinking about the fact that as Jesus is actually speaking to them, there are people outside at this very moment preparing a cross for Jesus. They are organizing themselves to torture and kill him. And this awesome, ugly reality is there. So the worldly politics of power and control and manipulation of the many by the few is just waiting for them to come out of the cenacle. They're outside. So as long as the apostles are enclosed in the cenacle with Jesus, everything seems okay. The moment they go out, it's going to be hell on earth. And so Jesus reminds them that they will have to live out their very special relationship with the Blessed Trinity in the midst of that chaos. They have to go out into the world as it is, with all its sin, all its unbelief, all its violence, all its persecution of the good. They'll have to go out into that. And it's in that context that they will have to be leaven in the dough, that they will have to be light in darkness, and that they will have to give spiritual life in that spiritual death. They will have to raise people spiritually from the dead. It's a very tall order. And so Jesus has spent so much time trying to build them up so that they would have the strength to actually do this. It's in this context that we come to understand rather quickly the need for the branch to stay attached to the vine. Because if the branch doesn't stay attached to the vine, it's going to die rather quickly. We're going to have Judas dead before Jesus in less than 24 hours. And so when we were just sort of gently going through the text, this background of pain and suffering was actually there. And so without the power of God working actively in them, they were going to fail God completely. And of course, we're going to see in the Passion that they will fail the Lord, all of them, but not completely. The only one who fails him completely is actually Judas. And so Jesus wants to explain to them why this is going to happen to them and why the church will be persecuted throughout history. So they need to understand that Jesus says, it's about me, you know. It's actually not about you. And this becomes quite clear in the Acts of the Apostles in chapter 4, when Peter and John are standing before the same Sanhedrin who condemned Jesus. And the Sanhedrin wants to condemn them also. And you get this wonderful statement that they recognized them as followers of Jesus. It's very interesting. And they were very surprised that these men who had no education and no background that they thought was important, that they could speak up and that they were not afraid of the Sanhedrin anymore. In fact, they were not afraid of anyone. The speed with which the apostles are transformed once the Holy Spirit comes is something totally fascinating. And we don't look at it enough. If we did look at it enough, we would allow the same thing to happen to us. And so by the time John actually wrote this gospel, so he wrote it towards the end of the 1st century. At that particular stage, the church had witnessed Jesus being persecuted, tortured, and killed. As he said himself in verse 25, he had been hated for no reason. He was actually killed for who he was, that he was the Son of God. But by the time John wrote this gospel, the early Christians had also been persecuted and imprisoned, and some of them killed, and some of the apostles as well. So they had come to realize, yes, the whole mystery had been passed on to them, including the cross. And the cross was never, ever going to be absent, because the cross was going to keep us purified. The cross was going to keep us totally dependent on the Lord. The cross was going to keep us on mark. We were not going to go astray. The cross would keep us right. So the world out there that John calls the cosmos, the unbelieving world, it didn't change just because God became man and because he spent 3.5 years on the earth. When Jesus died, everything went on apparently as normal. Everything in the temple appeared to go on as normal as well. The world in the Roman Empire didn't know anything about the mysteries that were going on in Israel. So everything went on. And so the world goes on, and the elite powers who rule the world don't want the little people to be free. They prefer to control the little people. And the elite powers of the world still, after 21 centuries, do not want to be reminded that God is there and that God's law is over theirs and that they have to obey God. They absolutely resent that. And so their reaction is to persecute the church. If any Christian, like Peter and John did before the Sanhedrin, will stand up to the elite powers and say to them, we must listen to God rather than men, you may be sure that the reaction will be persecution, because the elite powers are not going to take it that the little ones could actually stand up. And so the persecution will continue. So why does Jesus say it will be on my account that they do all this? That's verse 21. Why is that? It's because the battle that is actually going on spiritually, behind all the power politics and all the persecutions and all the distress and all the terror that's going on in the world, behind that is the struggle between good and evil, the struggle between light and darkness, the struggle between life and death, the struggle between God and Satan. That is the struggle that's going on. And it will continue as long as there are souls to be saved or lost on the earth. because that struggle has to go on in each one of us and in the world itself. So the apostles are being given reality therapy just at this particular point. So in this conflict, the passion of Jesus, which they will witness just within 24 hours, it will actually continue down all the centuries, because that is what's actually going on. And our choice as individuals is either to join Jesus and God's army, or go to the opposition and join the army of darkness and Satan. And the consequences for that decision are eternal. So, if you were to put this sort of succinctly, what would you say? Each one of us as individuals have got to choose the love of power, the love of manipulation and control, which is the world's position, or the power to love, which is Jesus' position. So it's the power to control or the power to love. And it's the power to love that will actually transform the world. John did warn us in chapter 3, verses 19 to 21, that some people would choose the darkness over the light because their deeds were evil. Their lifestyle was already in the camp of darkness and under the prince of this world, and they would come to actually choose it, which is a great mystery for us. And so those who would choose the darkness would absolutely resent those who had chosen the light. And so you could see this conflict goes on sometimes in every family, in every townland, in every city, in every country, in every culture, in every age. It continues. This battle is there. But we need to know what the battle actually is. Verse 22, Jesus says something terribly, terribly important that we need to really look at. He said, if I had not come in the incarnation, understood, if I had not spoken to them, in other words, if I had not revealed the Father, if I had not revealed God's will, if I had not given you the whole revelation that we have in the Gospels, if I had not spoken to them, they might have been blameless. In other words, it would just still be the Old Testament time. But as it is, they have no excuse for their sin. Now, the they starts with the Sanhedrin in the actual situation Jesus is in, because of all the people in Israel, they were the most responsible. They represented God to the people. Pilate, who represented the world power in Israel. The people of Israel, all of whom had heard Jesus. He had done a blitz campaign for 3.5 years. There couldn't have been anybody in Israel who hadn't heard him. You're going to hear Jesus himself make a statement to the Sanhedrin when he's put on trial. Everyone has heard me, he said. I've spoken openly to all. I have not hidden. I've not said anything in secret. They all had heard. So he says, if they have heard, they have no excuse. That's put you and me in a position of having no excuse either. We have heard. The word has been proclaimed at every Eucharist for 2,000 years. We have the scriptures. There's nobody stopping us from reading and studying the scriptures. We know. So we are without excuse. So the decision we make for or against the Christ is an eternal one. And we need to understand that. And then he adds, anyone who hates me hates my Father. Because he has told us, the Father and I are one. We have seen this wonderful Trinitarian reality that has been explained to us, and I've tried to put into words for you as well. So Jesus had said to Philip, to see me is to see the Father. And so the rejection of Jesus, the second person of the Most Holy Trinity, is the rejection of the Most Holy Trinity. That's what's so scary about Judas. He rejected the whole thing. And Judas was an educated man. He understood. He had been a man of the temple before he joined Jesus. If you are a person who has made a decision and that decision amounts to hating God the Father, when it comes to your own personal judgment, how could you possibly expect to enter heaven when you hate the person who lives there? When you have rejected the person who makes heaven, the person who is heaven for everyone. God is heaven. It's the experience of God that we call heaven. And so the eternal consequences are very, very clear. So Jesus repeats again in verse 24, "If I had not performed such works among them as no one else has ever done," they might have been blameless. So here Jesus is going back now to his works. First of all, he said, "I have given them my word." So that's the revelation of God that they have rejected. And he had said to Philip in chapter 14, "Look, Philip, if you can't, even at this stage, see that to see me is to see the Father, at least believe the works that I have done. The works that I have done are God's works." And so he repeats this here again, that his works alone will prove that he comes from God. But he said, and we're still in verse 24, "But as it is, they've seen all this and they still hate both me and my Father." Now, what does hate mean? Don't forget that when you're reading the Bible, the words have to be understood in a biblical context, not in a modern context. Because if you use it in a modern context, hate means very strong feelings of rejection and all that goes with it. To hate in the Bible means to strongly repudiate. So if I strongly repudiate God and push him out of my life, how can I ever expect to reach heaven? I can't. I've pushed heaven out of my life. And so the eternal consequences are very clear. They've hated both me and my Father. So verse 25 says, "But all this was only to fulfill what is already written in the law. They hated me for no reason." And Jesus is quoting Psalm 35 verse 19 and Psalm 69 verse 4. They hated Jesus for no reason. Now, what would be a reason for hating him? What would be a reason for rejecting him? If Jesus had committed sin, if Jesus had broken God's law, if Jesus had done something wrong, if Jesus had been unjust, etc., 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 all the worldly stuff, you might have a reason for hating him. But if the only thing that was coming out of him was love and joy and peace and healing and health and holiness and giftedness to other people, why would you reject him? When you look at it like that, it doesn't make any sense. They hated me for no reason. In other words, there was nothing in Jesus that would actually produce this reaction. That reaction is coming from yourself. And it's coming from your decision to choose the darkness over the light, to choose death over life, to choose hate rather than love. And so the decision actually shows the condition of the one who rejects God. And it shows them already in a condition of perdition if they don't change. They've hated me for no reason. And then in verse 26, he comes back to remind them of what the Holy Spirit will do. "When the advocate comes, whom I will send to you from my Father, that Spirit of truth that issues from the Father, he will be my witness, and you too will be my witnesses, because you have been with me from the outset." So there you have the explanation as to why Israel has rejected Jesus. and that he has been hated for absolutely no reason. But when the Holy Spirit comes, everything is going to be different for the disciples. And the Holy Spirit is going to witness for Jesus. And the apostles are also going to witness for Jesus. So in the mission of the church, against all the opposition and the rejection of the world, there will be two witnesses continuing. In Jesus' lifetime, it was the Father witnessing through Jesus and Jesus witnessing for the Father. And in the time of the church, it is the Holy Spirit witnessing for Jesus and Jesus, the church, through the apostles and other witnesses, giving that witness for Christ. The two are absolutely parallel, and therefore they will be his effective witnesses and they will bear fruit. Thank you for listening. Slán agus beannacht déilibh. Goodbye. God bless you.
Are you searching for fulfillment? Discover true happiness. Stay tuned to Shalom World.